today, our topic is 4 things you can do literally right now, today, to save your marriage or to enhance your marriage. Trade your expectations for appreciation and your whole life will change. Welcome to the High Vibe Life podcast, where we are obsessed with all things manifestation, neuroscience, personal growth, and quite simply, living a life beyond our wildest dreams. I'm Moira Casava, author, speaker, podcaster, manifestation, and mindset master. Since getting sober 25 years ago, I've helped tens of thousands of women break through and achieve massive levels of wealth, joy, and freedom. Now it's your turn. Let's dig in. Hi guys, welcome back to the podcast. I am fired up this morning. My brain has just been going and going and going ever since I woke up. I've been scribbling notes. I've been just kind of compiling all the things that I want to share with you. And today, our topic is 4 things you can do literally right now, today, to save your marriage or to enhance your marriage. So if you're watching on YouTube, will you put in the comments whether you are single or married? I'd love to know my audience. I feel like most of you guys are married, but I might be wrong. But 4 things you can do to save your marriage. This topic came up because I've really just been walking through a season with several friends of mine who are struggling. And I will totally admit that there have been many times over my 20-year marriage that I have struggled in my marriage. And we have weathered the storm. We have gotten through it. We have come out the other side stronger and better for it. And so I really feel like I do have some concrete tips and tools and processes for you to go through to get to the other side. Here's what I'm going to say first and foremost. It's all about action, right? Like so often when we are struggling, what I see people do is just staying in the struggle and not kind of leaning into the solution. So whenever I am stuck in a problem and your mind can't stop thinking about it, you're fixated on it, you're ruminating on it, I always think to myself, okay, I got to get out of the problem and I got to get into the solution. So how do I get into the solution? That shift for me comes when I start talking to people, when I start seeking out a better way and getting into action. So today I'm going to give you 4 things. I'm going to give you kind of a story that I heard, over 10 years ago that I literally always go back to in my brain and think about again and again and again. And it really just shifts my brain to the right perspective to have on my marriage when I'm in a funk. So that's number 1. And then I'm going to give you kind of another mindset shift and an understanding. I want you to wrap your head around this mindset shift that is then going to put us in the 3rd and the 4th tips, which are actually actions that you can take. Okay. So let's start with the story. So this is a story I heard about 10 years ago through a friend of mine who is a personal development guru, thought leader in the world. And he had actually learned this from Joel Osteen. So I actually have it written down here. So Joel says that our romantic partners usually fulfill only about 80% of our needs. Most people, however, focus on the 20% that's missing. Therefore, they ultimately become unhappy and unfulfilled. Sadly, many people will leave their relationships to find that 20% in someone else. What they find is that new person will also fulfill only 80% of their needs. They're just different needs and expectations from their last partner. Like this blew my mind when I heard this. I was like, oh my gosh. It just made so much sense to me, right? So the key is to focus on the 80% and not the 20%. The 80%, that's right, that's wonderful, all the things they're doing, all of the amazing things, all the reasons why you married this person, right? Or got together in a relationship with this person. That's the thing that's going to shift everything. So a lot of times when I speak on stage, I talk a lot about like the brain and what we focus on expands and, our reticular activating system and all this stuff. I actually use this example of my husband. I always say, have you ever in your marriage had a season where you have honestly felt like you couldn't go forward, like you couldn't see the rest of your life married to this person. And guys, when I say that, it might be like a moment, right? I'm not saying like a long season. It might just be a night where you're like, I can't do this anymore. And then you've got to look back and go, okay, but there have been other times in my marriage where I have literally felt that I am the luckiest person in the world. I've been drawn to tears. I've been overwhelmed with emotion. I've been thanking God. Like, how did you bring this man into my life, right? So here's the reality check. You are thinking completely two opposite ends of the spectrum. We have to get divorced, and I am the luckiest person in the world. They haven't changed. Your spouse hasn't changed. What you are focused on about them has changed. So let's take a moment to just wrap our head around, and don't forget this kind of story about the 80% and the 20%. So here's number 2. And this is kind of just a slogan that I want you to tattoo on your forehead. My friend Robin Sharma always says, give yourself a brain tattoo. Are you ready? Trade your expectations for appreciation. This is what I just talked about in this story. Trade your expectations for appreciation. So I, again, will be very vulnerable and share one of those moments, one of those days, one of those seasons where I honestly felt in my heart that I was like, I don't know if we're going to make it. I don't know if we're going to make it. And full transparency, women, wives, you might be able to relate. It was a day where like, if our skin touched, I recoiled. Like I was like, I was done. I was at my wit's end, but I'm laughing about it now, but it was one of the most brutally hard days ever. It was actually day 1 of a 6-day in-depth Tony Robbins event called Date with Destiny, which is where I always say Date with Destiny is the equivalent of like literally 20 years of therapy in 6 days. But I was walking around, I had to walk away from, him. And I was walking around this giant arena, and literally all of a sudden, out of nowhere, but God, it felt like there was like a spotlight in this huge arena, and all of a sudden I looked up, there's this giant almost like plaque on the wall with like all these things listed, like number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and I don't even know what the title of it was. All I saw was one line, and it said, trade your expectations for appreciation and your whole life will change. And I knew in that moment that was my problem, right? We have to take ownership. We have to look at our part in this and stop pointing the finger. All right, so that's number 2. Now, this is where we get into action. And this is really, guys, where, and I'm not trying to like be egotistical or be prideful or anything, but I look at my marriage and how amazing it is and how healthy. And that's not because I'm the luckiest girl in the world or, blah, 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 blah. It's because I've done the work. And this is part of the work. Like I get stuck. I get into these bad spots, but I get into action, like I said, starting out this episode. So number 3, what I would say to my friend, if she was like crying at my wit's end, I can't be married to this man anymore, I would say, listen, table that. We can talk about that, but let's just put that on hold, take our focus off of that for a second. And do me a favor, and every single day for the next 30 days, as hard as it is in this moment, write down one thing that you are appreciative of. Because we can hear, trade your expectations for appreciation, and we're like, great concept, I get it. But unless you're doing it, unless you're following it up with an actual daily action, nothing is going to change. Nothing. So you have to get into, I'm going to commit to this action of writing down every single day one thing I'm grateful for, one thing I can appreciate. You don't have to tell them. You just have to write it down. And I'm telling you, I know how hard this is at first when you are in a really bad place, but you got to do it. And then number 4, this one's a little bit harder. You will grow into it as the more appreciation you write down, but one teeny tiny thing that you could actually do for that person, right? Maybe one day it's like you fold the laundry and you're like, well, I do that every day. Well, still, that might count for that day, right? Maybe one day you send them a text message that just says, hey, babe, I hope you have a good day, right? It depends on where you are in that rockiness, right? One day you might go a little bit above and beyond and, make his favorite dessert or buy him his favorite candy bar or something like that. But just teeny tiny walk by and, touch him. Sounds so small, but you do that every day for 30 days, it's going to build, right? We're talking about the compound effect, building over time, these tiny little deposits. You've got to put these daily deposits in. This is what erodes a relationship over time, not depositing anything in, right? All right, so that's number 4. So there's your 4. The story, the 80-20. Number 2, trade your expectations for appreciation. Number 3, your daily practice of actually writing down something you appreciate. Number 4, a daily action, a deposit into that person. Telling you, if you do this for 30 days, you are not going to recognize your marriage. And then I'm going to wrap with this because I do get asked a lot about, how Brian and I have survived the last 20 years. I mean, it's guys, we have our baggage, like, addiction and disorders and good gosh, like family history and all these things that we bring into the marriage. Like, how do we navigate all of that? And I always say therapy and Jesus, but I'm going to add another one. But really, truly, I am the biggest believer in therapy. Do not let pride talk you out of therapy, especially husbands. If we hadn't gone to therapy early on, we would never be married today. And I will tell you that a friend of mine who is a therapist said to me the day I kind of said, hey, we're really struggling, and our kids were little. Oh, brings up some emotion. She kind of looked at me matter-of-factly and she said, you can go to therapy now when it's not that bad, or you can go in 10, 15, 20 years when you might not be able to come back from it. There might be too much there at that point. And she said, I see it every day. And she said, I highly suggest you go now. And so we went. We went before it completely unraveled, although it did feel like it had completely unraveled in that moment. And my husband went kicking and screaming, and he is the biggest believer in therapy today. So therapy, Jesus, because that is the other thing I will say, that we in our society can get so caught up in our marriage in the comparison game of he's not doing what he's doing. And, you're comparing your husband to your friend's husbands or the outside world. And you've got to just get right with God. And every single time that I was in that season of expectations and you're not good enough, I would sit in church on a Sunday and be overwhelmed with what a good man he was, because the outside stuff doesn't matter. And so bring God into your life. God is first and foremost before anything else in your life. It's the priority in your marriage, right? It's that triangle. It's you, your partner, and God. So you got to have that. And then last but not least, I would say this. We are huge believers and action takers of our own personal growth. And so it's about, I'm always doing a lot of work on myself. He's always doing a lot of work on himself. We're not doing a lot of finger pointing to each other. Right? I think when you do those 3 things, when you prioritize Jesus, you prioritize your faith, when you are open to always going to therapy, and you really focus on your own self versus the other person, you're going to have an extraordinary marriage. And so I just want to encourage you in that. And the last thing I'll say about therapy is I always say this to people that are like, you guys go to therapy? I'm like, yeah, because I want a phenomenal marriage, a great marriage. Even when Brian and I slip into like good, kind of the monotony of like, yeah, things are good. I'm like, hey, let's go to therapy again. He's like, what? Nothing's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, I don't need anything to be wrong to want to seek out better, right? Good is not good enough for me. I want extraordinary. And that's what I want for you too. So I hope this episode helped. Share it with your friends. Tag me if you get anything out of this. Write back, and you can leave comments, especially on YouTube. I would love to hear what you took away from this episode, and we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.